Hey guys, welcome back. Um, this is the first. There's no easy way to put this, but this is the first episode of the College Football with Sam live show. That's what's going on here. Today's plan is going over Michigan State head coaching candidates. Also previewing parts of Week 4, but specifically looking at Ohio State, Notre Dame, because I think there are some ramifications to, especially Ohio State, if they come out with a loss, but also Notre Dame. And then, of course, there is what seems to be, in my mind, a three-man race for the Big Ten, and then a 3 to 4 man race for the national title. We'll get to that part, of course, at the end. Right now, before we begin, I want you guys to type in the comments section. This is how we'll start off every video too, is I want to see how you all are doing. So tell me how you're doing. And also list a coach you would like to see Michigan State go after. Whether that be Jason Candle, Toledo, PJ Fleck, Minnesota. Maybe you want to go bold and you want to steal Marcus Freeman away from Notre Dame. Public service announcement. You have the money to do that. Or maybe you bring in Mike Elko from Duke. What do you guys think? I'm going to wait for the chat to roll a little bit. Trevor Mead says Michigan State should consider Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer, we'll talk about him throughout this segment. I think that he is an elite selection with a caveat. That caveat obviously being reputation. He doesn't have a good reputation. And he's old. So if Michigan State brings him on the staff, I think that they should have his successor lined up, preferably within the staff, if they do indeed hire him. And I don't know, and I don't think that Michigan State will hire him, but that's a good suggestion. SFS inverted. This is obviously laced with sarcasm here. Ryan Day. Well, Ryan Day is either going to the NFL or he's staying at Ohio State. Unless he somehow goes 8-5, maybe 9-4 this year, he's not being fired. And Ryan Day is a coach that, we'll get to this in a few minutes, but Ryan Day is a coach who's much better than what the national media, in my mind, would have you think. But if he gets fired for whatever reason, maybe he's fired for going, 11-1, I'd probably put him in the, I'd say, great or good candidacy, just because we still don't know if his performances are entirely due to the program Urban built, or if we don't know how great of a coach he is. I assume that he's elite, but to go from Ohio State to Michigan State, I mean, that's a pretty big demotion. I'm kind of not doing great, but hey, it's cool to always see you, Sam. Hey, amazing. I hope you do better. Seriously. How are you outside of, not doing great? Like, what games are you excited for this week? Blank name doing good. They should get Mike Ditka. Okay, come on, guys. Give me some serious suggestions, please. We're gonna go to Hummus Hero because he's giving some legitimate suggestions. Elko would be a home run, but he might hold out for even better jobs. Mike Elko, I also put in my elite category. We'll get to my category starting from the worst and ending at the best. I'd say at 7-10. But looking at Elko, what he's done so far at Duke, he went 9-4 last year, and this year so far he's 3-0. Beat Clemson, has a chance to beat Florida State. The way they, honestly took apart Clemson and reverse engineered that entire program, I could see them beating Florida State. I think Florida State is doomed to lose a regular season game this year. And as we go further throughout the season, this will be a name that definitely fluctuates because he's only been at Duke for 2 years. He's only been a head coach for 2 years. So if Duke goes 6-6, I doubt that happens. But if they do, his name will quickly slide down. If he reaches the ACC championship game, he becomes one of the hottest names in college football. And luckily for Michigan State, they have a large donor base. They have a ton of money, as proof positive that Mel Tucker was paid nearly $10 million a year, and it turns out that he was one of the biggest grifters in college football history. That's something that I and Mike Valeni agree on. Truth be told, nice to see you on here. You're a Michigan State fan who I enjoy talking to in the comments section. No Meyer or Narduzzi. Meyer is a knucklehead, and Narduzzi turned on MSU. Both are also old. Like, adding those factors in, there's definitely risks with hiring them both. I would say from a football standpoint, Meyer's a better hire. From an off-the-field standpoint, Narduzzi is better. But, yeah, I don't think those hires would fit the best. I think there are, in fact, 2 coaches who I think Michigan State could get that might have more success winning on the field and off the field than even Urban Meyer, but we'll talk about that. Hummus Hero, maybe Jason Candle is a realistic hire. They could get him for less and see where it goes. Yeah, but he's been at Toledo for so long, and I think Michigan State has the resources to go bigger. Maybe if they want to play it safe and get him for cheap while still winning something, yeah. But that would imply that Michigan State is not willing to compete at a high level, and like they said they wanted to when they hired Mel Tucker. And finally, Brownie talks sports. Matt Campbell is probably lobbying Michigan State. If he continues his woes this season, I would put him in the do not touch hire. I already have him in my lowest category, just based off of his past 2 seasons. And finally, Darren talks ball. Stoops from Kentucky, not really an expert in this area. I think that with what he's done at Kentucky, he's gotten 2 10-win seasons. He's done more with less. Michigan State has more resources than Kentucky dedicated to football. The Big Ten has a more lucrative TV contract than the SEC does, at least at this moment. And Michigan State, they're a top 25 program in attendance, revenue, and they could definitely use that to recruit inside of the top 25. So I think Stoops, I think that would be a great choice. Let me give you some of my names. We'll come back to the comments in due time. But let me give you some of my names. I'm starting off in the meh category. Jason Candle, Pat Narduzzi, Matt Campbell. These are coaches that Michigan State could hire, and they could work, they could do well, but I think in hiring these coaches, you are not going to win much of anything. You will go bowling, you might have a top 25 finish here and there, you might play Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State close, but if you're Michigan State with these head coaches, you will probably never beat the cream of the crop Big Ten programs. And by probably never, I mean 99% guaranteed you won't. You will never appear in Indy again if you hire these coaches. You will be a above average Power 5 program or an average Power 5 program. You will be better than Tucker had Michigan State in 22 and 23. You might even get a year where you get a 2021 type season where they go to a New Year's Six Bowl, maybe get a fluke once and forever win over, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan with these coaches. But I think that Jason Candle and Pat Narduzzi and Matt Campbell, these are 3 coaches that I could see Michigan State hiring, but I don't think, it's not that I don't think they would fit, I just think Michigan State could really do better than that. That's the meh category. I don't want to spend too much time there. Pat Narduzzi, he's old. Campbell right now, I'm calling into question how good of a head coach he is. Honestly, 1-2 right now, 4-8 last year, and Jason Candle's the head coach of a MAC school. and he hasn't gotten better offers. So that's what I would call the meh category. Here's the good category. Sonny Dykes, PJ Fleck, Brett Bielema, Garrett Riley. Fleck and Bielema are from the Big Ten. It would be upgrades for them. Minnesota and Illinois do not have the resources Michigan State does. They don't have the same prestige. They're just not good in anything. Stadium attendance, revenue, donor base. Michigan State has more resources. And Fleck and Bielema have proven that they can win with scraps. Bielema has proven he can win the Big Ten and beat the best of the best when he was at Wisconsin. And he beat, Jim Tressel and also beat Mark D'Antonio a handful of times. And he rebuilt Illinois in 2 seasons. Imagine what he could do at Michigan State. I don't think that he would be someone who, of course, is an elite head coach. But a good head coach? Oh, yeah, of course. Remember, Illinois last year lost to Michigan State by 8. I think they lost to Purdue by 7. And they lost to Michigan by 2. And they lost to Mississippi State by 9 in the bowl game. Very competitive team. It's classic Big Ten football. Michigan State might be moving back in time with offense, but they'll be moving miles ahead back to the no-fly zone in defense, I would imagine, with Brett Bielema as the head coach. With PJ Fleck, it would be similar, albeit I think Bielema is more proven in the conference given his Wisconsin resume, and also the fact that currently he's 2-0 against Fleck. Fleck is more energetic, he's younger, he'll probably be more adaptable to the times than Bielema will in terms of scheme, but he really doesn't care about recruiting. I imagine that translates to him not caring a whole lot about name, image, and likeness. And outside of his win over James Franklin in 2019 and him beating Wisconsin in 2018, 2021, and 2022, there aren't too many big wins that you see attached to PJ Fleck. He can compete, but it might be a similar story to, Candle, Narduzzi, and Campbell, where you're not going to see too many big wins. Sonny Dykes and Garrett Riley are different. These are innovators. These are guys where Michigan State would change its whole identity to accommodate these head coaches. Riley has never coached as a head coach, ever, but he's a great offensive mind. He won the Broyles Award in 2022, and his offense crushed and exposed Michigan's defense. Not Ohio State, not Penn State. Nope, it was TCU. And then Sonny Dykes is a similar story, except he was the head coach. He's more seasoned than Riley is, obviously, but right now, TCU lost to Colorado. Dykes, outside of last year, doesn't have the greatest resume. I thought entering this season he was a top 10 head coach, and right now he beat Houston, beat Nichols, and he's going to face off against SMU, his school from 2 years past, that has Preston Stone at quarterback and is good, so we'll see how he does. Dykes is a name that if TCU, let's say the Colorado loss was a fluke and they get 10 wins again, becomes an even hotter name. Or he could slide down the list if TCU goes 5-7 or even 6-6, because I think they have the talent to do better than 6-6. So those are some good names. I'm going to very quickly check the chat here, see what you guys are thinking about all of this. Let me just scroll here. Few people talking about chaos, asking questions. We'll get to these. We'll talk about week 4 previews just a little bit. Someone wanted to shoot out Darren Talks Ball. The problem for Michigan State is they were without a president and their leadership is a mess. I believe even the athletic director is an interim. No, Harlan Barnett's the full-time athletic director, but yeah, the president is interim and the board of trustees and the leadership is an absolute mess. You were right about that. Brownie Talks Sports. I know this is no chance of happening, but Paul Christ, he was not the problem at Wisconsin. I'd probably put him in either the meh or good category. He's a hire that wouldn't, drive the program into the ground, but I don't think he would get them off the ground either. He wouldn't allow Michigan State to take off and compete for conference championships. A few people are mentioning Brian Hartline, Darren Talks Ball, yes, Fleck was from Western Michigan. He coached there for, I think, 4 seasons. Hummus Hero, great point here, says that Michigan State returning to the elite of the Big Ten will be very tough unless they get a Grand Slam hire. So many excellent programs going forward. There will likely be 6 to 8 in the Big Ten as a ceiling. That's in terms of program. Yeah. For these good and even some of the great coaches, I don't think Michigan State can go forward. I think that'd be very hard. But for some of these elite head coaches, I think that Michigan State can make the next jump. Let's start off with great. We got Lance Leipold, Mark Stoops, Sean Lewis, and Marcus Freeman. Freeman is young. Same with Lewis. Those are both young minds. Freeman being a wizard and being a savant on defense, and Lewis being the same, but on offense. The only reason I didn't put Garrett Riley into this category is because he has no coaching experience. Lewis was a head coach at Kent State and ran phenomenal offenses there. Freeman at least has coached at Notre Dame. He's a great recruiter, knows how to connect with kids, and, his locker room, he commands them very well. Very mature, cerebral. I think Freeman right now is not a top 25 head coach, but I think that with the right staff and also with him learning over time, he'll likely develop into one. It's very rare that you see Ryan Day or even like Dan Lanning. They jump out in year one and have great years. That's very rare. Freeman didn't have that. He lost to Stanford, lost to Marshall, but played close with Ohio State and dominated Clemson. He's still building his program right now. Right now, in the first 4 games they've played, his team looks better than last year. So that means, in my mind, he's improving as a head coach and learning, and he's making things work at Notre Dame, who has surprisingly, I don't think they have less resources than Michigan State, but they're not as willing to use them. They didn't want to hire Andy Ludwig from Utah because the contract was too much, which is just, it's asinine, but it is what it is. Michigan State won't have problems doing that. They're paying $1 million to Scotty Hazelton, Jay Johnson, and Chris Kapilovich to just lose by 50 to any team that has an offense. So they'll have no problem, throwing out $2 million for an actual great offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator that matters. Michigan State could steal Marcus Freeman away. I think they have the money to do that. That'd be a flashy name that would attract a lot of attention to the program. Michigan State recruiting would immediately improve. The question is, he's young, which means either it's a boom hire, a grand slam, or it could be a bust. There's a lot of variance to his hire. A lot of variance. And Notre Dame right now plays with a far easier schedule and plays in the easier conference. They're kind of in the ACC in football in anything but name, because they have to play, I think, 5 ACC opponents in their schedule as part of their deal to stay an independent. So a lot of variance with that hire, but I think it would be great. I would praise that move, saying this as a Michigan fan. We'll see what Freeman does this week against Ohio State. He's another name that could rise or fall relatively quickly. We'll have to see. Sean Lewis, Mark Stoops, Lance Leipold. I'm not going to spend as much time on those because I don't think those would be, from the media perspective, as Grand Slam. Leipold is old. He's nearing 60, but every program he's been at, he has rebuilt in a timely manner. He's experienced. He's won national titles at lower levels. He's had success at Buffalo. He's built Kansas into a competent program. A Kansas team that hadn't gone bowling since 2008. And they have really creative offenses everywhere he goes. They can run, they can pass, they can do anything with his offenses, especially if he brings along his current offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, to Michigan State. He also has Midwestern ties. Obviously with Sean Lewis and I think even Mark Stoops. I don't think Kentucky's in the Midwest, but it's not like on the far East Coast or Pacific Coast. It's, closer. And Kentucky has recruited prospects in Indiana and neighboring states who are in the Midwest. All these great head coaches, or at least the coaches who I have under the category of great, they have some kind of Midwest ties for the most part. Lewis, savant at offensive coordinator. Right now, he's developed a Colorado offense that is scoring over 40 points per game, despite not having an offensive line and having running backs who are better at catching the ball than, better at catching and receiving the ball than they are at running the ball, which is crazy. And Stoops, we've talked about this a little earlier in the show. He does more with less. I think that he would work at Michigan State with more resources. Finally, we have the elite head coaches. Urban Meyer, Jonathan Smith, Kalen DeBoer, Chris Kleiman, and I think I probably would place him back in the great category, not elite, Mike Elko. But the reason I placed Elko in this category is he's like Leipold, except he's a defensive mind, which fits Michigan State's tradition, and he's younger. So there's a better chance that he sticks around for longer and doesn't retire. He also has beaten Clemson. Lance Leipold at Kansas has not beaten a cream of the crop opponent yet of his conference. Though we don't know if Clemson, we don't know how good they are still. We just assume they aren't elite or aren't even great. But at least, he got a top 10 upset signature win. So for now, I'm putting him in this category. Elko commanded elite defenses at Notre Dame and Texas A&M. It seems like him leaving A&M for Duke might have been, the equivalent of pulling the plug on Jimbo Fisher's program. Last year, their defense was horrible against the run. This year, it's horrible against the pass. And it seems like A&M now has to be, prolific on offense in order to stay in games against good opponents. Just see Miami. I think it'd be a good hire. I'd be very intrigued with it. Chris Kleiman is another coach who, is not young, not super flashy, but he's not old either. He's won national titles in the FCS with North Dakota State. He does more with less. Kansas State reminds me a lot of the Iowa of the Big 12, except they have an offense in exchange for not having a constant top 5 defense. But right now they have, Cooper Beebe at offensive line as a guy who Kleiman developed and nurtured. He's going to be a first-round pick. Last year they had a first-round defensive end. They made Adrian Martinez work at quarterback. Adrian Martinez was in a horrible supporting cast at Nebraska, and then when he came to Kansas State, he helped them, and they helped him. So Kleiman's system works for transfers. It works for recruits. They're very good about being fundamental and in the trenches. They have great tight ends. Example, Ben Sinot, who did very well against Missouri. And they've developed some pretty impressive quarterbacks in college, whether it's Skylar Thompson or now in Will Howard. So great developmental guy, not elite recruiter. That's the one downside of Kleiman. So he'd kind of be like a D'Antonio, which has worked in the past and I'm confident could work even in the present. But these next three, Meyer, Smith, and DeBoer, are going to recruit much better. They're going to, in my mind, develop as well, if not better. The question, of course, with Meyer is he's aging. He's alluded that he doesn't want to coach again. The game, in my mind, has the potential to have had passed him by because the name, image, and likeness, the portal, all those different things. And toward the end of his careers at Florida, but also at Ohio State, he plateaued. He did. Honestly, Saban ran him out of the SEC, and it took Ryan Day becoming his offensive coordinator to prevent his offenses from becoming almost predictable. The 2016 offense was a massive waste of talent, and in 17, blowout loss to Iowa, blowout loss to Oklahoma, and the team was once again inefficient. It was a great team nationally, but they didn't reach the college football playoff, and in 16 they got shut out in the playoffs. And in 18 they still had issues on defense, occasional issues on offense, but it was Ryan Day and Dwayne Haskins, rest in peace, that really caused Ohio State to get 12, 13 wins and look prolific once again on offense. So Meyer could be a choice. I'd go with Jonathan Smith and Kalen DeBoer, though. DeBoer has Midwestern ties. Smith doesn't, but They've won everywhere that they've been, whether as a coordinator or as a head coach. Both right now have great offensive lines. Both entered disastrous situations in one way or another, are now on top of the world. Smith, in my mind, along with DeBoer, are commanding top 10 teams. If you saw my top 10 video today, you know that I think Oregon State and Washington are actually top 5 teams right now in college football. And they have good quarterback play, good skill position play. Jonathan Smith, he knows how to get rid of staff members. For example, his defenses until 2021 were just atrocious. So he fires his then DC, and he hires a new, young defensive mind, and the defense instantly improves. So he can make hard decisions. And Kalen DeBoer, he helped Indiana and Tom Allen have their only successful seasons in recent memory. Big Ten ties, knows how to succeed at a Big Ten program that isn't talent-rich. I think Smith and DeBoer would be my top 2 coaches to look after. Let's check the chat, and then we'll move on talking about Ohio State and Notre Dame. Yeah, let's check the chat. Okay. Ooh, music for me 007. Nice to see you here. Great Buckeye fan. I'm a guy who isn't afraid to call me out when he thinks I'm wrong. Oftentimes this season so far I have been wrong. It's nice to have you on here. He says, Morgan Scaley, you want a guy that can do more with less. He always puts a good defense out there, even though they don't get the recruiting rankings. That's an underrated selection. Gosh, I know that he's the defensive coordinator at Utah. That's about all I know, is that he's the defensive coordinator at Utah, and he's good, and he can develop players. But when you pointed out his name to me, I thought that he might be the head coach in waiting. And I think that's the case, because he's an alum at Utah, and he's been their DC since 2016. I don't think he's going to want to leave. I mean, he's an alum. Kyle Whittingham was promoted from defensive coordinator to being head coach. I imagine the same thing will go on there, potentially, because Whittingham has been public about that. I think however many years it is, or he said originally, I think he said he wants to retire at 2026 or 2027. So Scaley just has to continue to do his job and put up great defenses, which he will for another 3 or 4 years, and he'll probably get the head coaching gig. Brownie Talk Sports. Let's be real, though. Maybe I'm blind from fandom, but PJ isn't leaving Minnesota for Michigan State. I don't think he wants to restart his culture revolution. He probably won't, and I also don't know if Michigan State would go after him. Because, again, they want flashy, but the kind of flashy that, like, resonates with everyone. At least on the surface. There are a notable amount of people, and you see this in the fact that there have been several reports every year released, which are turned out to be proven false by law firms about toxic culture allegations. Not everyone likes PJ Fleck. Let's just be very clear about that. I am a fan of him. I don't think he's this elite or near elite head coach. I think that's pretty evident. I like him. Not everyone does, and I think Michigan State needs a guy who cares about recruiting. I don't think Fleck cares about recruiting other than finding diamonds in the rough, which is great, but unless you're a wizard and a savant, you can't win at that level with only diamonds in the rough. That takes a rare kind of coach to do. D'Antonio did it, but D'Antonio was special. Let's not be mistaken about that. Okay. Excellent hire, in my opinion, that would have me a little worried about Michigan State would be Jim Leonhard. Leonard's a curious case. Wisconsin didn't give him the head coaching job, but it's understandable because they were looking at Luke Fickell. And even though they maybe wanted to give Leonhard the coaching job, Fickell was just... I mean, come on. Fickell was a top 10 head coach nationally while coaching at a group of 5 school. And he still is a top 10 head coach in my mind right now. They are having some struggles at Wisconsin more than I anticipated, but I think they're going to be the type of team It gets better as the year goes on, and they're always going to play hard. And I think with Fickell, they have a chance to win the Big Ten again at Wisconsin. That's the kind of hire that Michigan State needs, is a guy like Fickell who can recruit relative to him being in the group of 5. He did pull in some 4-stars here and there. He did care about recruiting. And right now, Wisconsin, at least last time I checked it, close to a top 25 recruiting class. And he's an innovator. And he's competed with Power 5 teams and beaten Power 5 teams like Notre Dame. Notre Dame went 11-1 in 2021. Who's their only loss to? Cincinnati, and Cincinnati dominated them. Someone said Kirk Ferentz's son. No, thank you. Looking at some other comments. That's really it in regards to the Michigan State head coaching search. I think that Jonathan Smith or Kalen DeBoer would be the perfect choice. Jonathan Smith, after all, depending on what Oregon State does, he'll be in a tough position because his university is likely going to go from Power 5 to Group of 5. DeBoer would probably be a harder coach to lure away because Washington's a better program than Oregon State. They'll have more resources in joining the Big Ten. And Smith's been at Oregon State for a while. DeBoer might want to see what he has going with him at Washington. This is only his second year there. But those would be my top 2 candidates. I'm not going to put Urban Meyer on my list. I think it's unrealistic. I also think that, as someone mentioned earlier, he's a knucklehead, and he's not a good person. I think Jonathan Smith and Kalen DeBoer, to my knowledge, are good people. Chris Kleiman, basically anyone on my elite list except for Meyer, everyone on my great list, and on the good list, I'd say everyone on the good list should receive a call. Every coach I mentioned except Candle, Narduzzi, Campbell should receive calls from the university, in my opinion. Now, I want to get to Ohio State and talk about the Buckeyes, because Saturday's a big deal. It's a, tremendous... Ohio State has to win that game. They have to. Why do they have to? I mean, can't they lose to Notre Dame? And can't they... I'm going to sit back in my chair a little bit. Scoot up. Apologies for the noise. But I want to lean back. Didn't mean to bump the camera. They can't lose to Notre Dame. Because let me tell you, objectively, I don't think Notre Dame is as good as Penn State or Michigan. I don't think that's the case. I think that Notre Dame is Michigan light, is the best way I can put it. If Ohio State is going to go on the road and lose to Notre Dame, they will go on the road and they will get blown out. They'll get blown out by Michigan if they lose to Notre Dame. Michigan is better than Notre Dame at literally every position, except for special teams right now. And I think that's because Michigan is starting backup players on special teams to prevent any kinds of injuries. They're being overly conservative with special teams. That's why they're not good there statistically. Michigan's better than Notre Dame at everything. Penn State is worse than Notre Dame at interior O-line play. Actually, overall offensive line play. They might be worse at quarterback. They might be worse at wide receiver. I think they're better at tight end. They're definitely better at running back. And Penn State, as much as I sometimes give crap to Manny Diaz, Diaz is a good DC. I just don't think he's elite, but he's good, great, maybe near elite. The staff surrounding him, no doubt, is elite. The assistants there for Penn State on defense. And Penn State, just period amen, has a legit defense. They have an elite defense. Notre Dame's defense is a paper tiger. Plain and simple. Michigan State, for context, allowed less rushing yards to Central Michigan than Notre Dame did. Now, I know the transitive property doesn't work, but Central Michigan against Notre Dame started a quarterback, the quarterback who didn't have legs. Bert Emanuel did not play in that game. He's honestly their best running threat, and they still rushed for 100 yards on Notre Dame. Michigan State, meanwhile, they had to play against Bert Emanuel, who was built like a running back, and for all intents and purposes is a running back. He cannot throw a pass. And they still did better against the run than Notre Dame did. Notre Dame has problems against the run. They haven't faced a passing offense that matters outside of maybe NC State. Meanwhile, Ohio State has at least faced Western Kentucky. And Indiana actually, as, Louisville looks good. Ohio State, I think, is elite. Indiana's looking like a better team than I suspected. So, for that little preview, and if you're curious for a larger preview, you can check out my channel. And I think in the recommended video on the homepage of the channel, you will see a preview and prediction video for Ohio State, Notre Dame. Ohio State has played, in my mind, the tougher strength of schedule so far, which doesn't mean much of anything, but, for whatever grain of salt that is, I'm going to bring that up. They have the better talent roster. They have the better coach. They have the better staff. They have the better defense. They have the better offense. On paper, of course, we don't know all of these things for sure until they play. I don't want to act like Notre Dame doesn't have a chance, because schematically, Notre Dame's one advantage outside of them being at home is they have the better special teams unit, they have the much better O-line, and they match up well with Ohio State. Again, they're Michigan, they're in a certain sense and I say mediocre because I think Michigan's elite. They're a mediocre mimic of Michigan. That's what Notre Dame is. If Ohio State can't beat that team in South Bend, the team, I rarely criticize teams for, their logo and their history, but I'm going to do it for Notre Dame. The team that backed out of their rivalries with Michigan and Michigan State to pick up more wins. If you lose to that team, Penn State, in my mind, you're an underdog against them, and you're a big underdog against Michigan. 9-3, which looked impossible in the preseason, looks somewhat likely. And 10-2, you're certainly going 10-2 in my mind if you lose to Notre Dame. You're definitely losing to Michigan. You could beat Penn State, but Penn State already matched up moderately well with Ohio State in the preseason. A loss to Notre Dame is just detrimental. It is. I mean, in the preseason, this is how much I overrated Wisconsin. I'm going to admit to a bad take. I thought Notre Dame was going to be the fourth toughest team on the schedule. They're still the third, even though they look better than I expected them to. You can't, if you're Ryan Day, if you're Kyle McCord, if you're Marvin Harrison Jr., if you're Mike Hall, if you're Jim Knowles, unless you hold Notre Dame's offense to under 21 points, you can't afford to lose. Because if you allow, let's say, 28, 31, 35 to Notre Dame's offense, and I know they've looked good, you're going to allow in the 40s to Michigan, maybe the 50s, probably the 40s to Penn State as well. I think they have better offenses than Notre Dame's does. Or at least they're better coordinated. They have, Mike Yursich and Sharon Moore are better OCs than Gerard Parker, in my mind. So I absolutely don't think that there is a way for Ohio State to lose this game and come out not being one of college football's biggest losers in the month of September, to put it in that way. And I respect Ryan Day, and I respect Ohio State, and I like what Day has done with the program. I think he took Urban Meyer's program and made it better in a lot of areas. I think that Meyer, later Ohio State tenure, Urban Meyer would have lost to 2021 Michigan and to 2022 Michigan. Honestly, those are the two best Michigan teams since 2006, if you count the 2021 team, and since 1997, the national title team, if you only look at 2022. Urban Meyer, in all likelihood, was not beating either of those teams. Probably wouldn't have played them close either. He ran into a brick wall. Ryan Day is having to deal with something in Michigan reviving itself that Urban Meyer never had to deal with, outside of maybe 2016. And that team had an injured Wilton Spate at quarterback and a host of other problems. So, yeah, I'll check the chat, see what you guys think. I, for one, think that Ohio State, they can't lose. Let me just look at the chat. Daniel Paul, Notre Dame is Michigan's second team. I would agree. And this is bold. Defensively, they're probably like Michigan's, third team, at least up front. Notre Dame's strength is in their pass defense. Their secondary, I think, is better than their D-line. You can't, at a program like Notre Dame, you cannot replace Isaiah Foskey with Javonte Jean-Baptiste. That's not, maybe I'm wrong. In my mind, that's not going to work. Definitely second team on offense, though. Defense, I'd say at D-line, probably the third team, but that goes to show how deep Michigan's D-line is. Notre Dame still has talent on defense. They're a good defense, but their stats are puffed up by horrid competition. You can't count Indiana as a win for the Buckeyes, in my opinion, because they may as well have not shown up that day running that offense, and you will not see them run again. A win isn't a win, but they didn't lose, and they've clearly, in my mind, have learned from that Indiana game, I think. I think they're better than they were on that day. I think McCord's a lot more poised. I think that he has better chemistry with his wide receivers. And the offensive line, I don't know if it's better, but it just looks better. I say I don't know because Indiana has a much better defense than Youngstown State or Western Kentucky could have ever dreamed of having. I don't think the Buckeyes are definitely losing to the Wolverines. I mean, let's not get too confident. It is the game. Well, Hummus Hero, you're right. And you're right in a sense. But what I'm trying to communicate is I'm expecting you to beat Notre Dame by 2 to 3 touchdowns. If you do that, or even if you just beat them, if you just win by a field goal, in my mind, you still have a great chance of beating Michigan. And of course, every given Saturday, they'd have the Buckeyes with their talent, and with that being a rivalry, the game, they would have a solid chance to beat Michigan no matter what. But schematically and on paper, which again, doesn't matter all the time, but sometimes matters, it is so hard for me to see if you lose to Notre Dame on the road, and let's say you lose to them by double digits, or you come back in the end, but for most of the game it wasn't close. It then is very hard for me to see you beating Penn State, and especially being on the road in a stadium that will be full of maize and blue, unlike Notre Dame Stadium where there will be a plethora of Ohio State fans there. It would be very hard for me to see. Music for me 007. If they are Michigan Light, Ohio State beat Michigan Light 62-39 and 56-27. That's why it's a rivalry again, because Michigan improved overall team speed along with changing their defensive scheme. Absolutely. And I'm expecting you to a certain degree to do to Notre Dame what you used to do to us. I think you'll splatter them. Al Golden is an overrated defensive coordinator. The only reason I didn't pick the game to be 45-20 is the clock rules. And that benefits a team like Notre Dame who will want to limit possessions, and I think they'll be able to run on you, at least initially. They have one of the best O-lines in the country, and they have one of the best running backs in the country. If they can't run on you, Michigan, my team, may also not be able to run on you. So this is a great opportunity as well to, test Ohio State's defense and see how they are. Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point. I mean, Don Brown, and people can say, they'll compare him to Jim Knowles or even Manny Diaz. Just, Don Brown was an exceptional type of stubborn. And that's what, killed him at Michigan, is he could never, ever, ever adapt. Okay. Darren talks ball. Do you plan on doing these weekly, Sam? Good stuff so far. Yes. Weekly Thursdays at 7. I didn't have time to edit everything I wanted to tonight. This might be the standard look for the rest of the year. We'll have to see, but I'm planning on doing this 7 p.m. Eastern time Thursday nights. No other promises outside of that, though. Hummus Hero. Oh, yeah, I definitely agree there. If they lose to Notre Dame, that doesn't bode well for Penn State or the team up north games. Yeah, I mean, right now, neutral site, Ohio State, Michigan is practically a coin flip, neutral site. And I don't think you could say that about anyone else except for maybe Georgia matching up with Michigan. For Ohio State, the only team that would be coin flip with them would be Michigan. I think Michigan's better than Ohio State, but Ohio State's scheme is very you have to have whatever Michigan has in strength and conditioning and their ability to run the football to beat Ohio State more than 5 or 6 times out of 10, because that offense and defense is too potent with too much talent. Also, speaking of, talent efficiency, so far I think Ohio State, out of, Alabama, Georgia, and the Buckeyes, who are by far the 3 most talented teams in the country, I think Ohio State is the most developmentally efficient out of those 3 so far this year. Alabama looks horrendous. Georgia looks lost on offense. Ohio State looked lost on offense until this Saturday. They looked solid on defense the whole way and are the highest. Actually, Ohio State's the number 1 defense according to PFF's grades, by the way. And Michigan's at 2. So, very interesting there. Full Metal Pilot will read 1 or 2 more comments and then get on finally to the 3-way race for the Big Ten. I picked Notre Dame to win because to me they are the more physically dominant and veteran team with a better quarterback, better trench play, and they match up well with Ohio State. This is bold, and people are going to call me mad here. I may even get some dislikes live. I think after this game, Ohio State will have the better quarterback. That very much right now classifies as nearly a hot take. I think after the game though it will be pretty evident after, Notre Dame. I have to be honest, I think it's very unlikely that Ohio State blows out Notre Dame. When was the last time in the Ryan Day era that they blew out a top 10 team? Very good point. That's again why I picked them to win by 18 points. I've predicted Ryan Day to blow out top 10 teams over and over again. It never happens. He did in 2019, dominated Penn State. That wasn't a blowout, but the game was more dominant than the score indicated. He blew out Michigan, who in the AP was ranked in the top 10. He blew out Clemson in the 2020 college football playoff semifinal. Penn State lost by 2 scores, which is rare for a James Franklin team to do against Ohio State in both 2021 and last year. So it's not very often, if little, any. That's why I'm picking them to win by 18. 18, in my mind, a blowout is maybe now a blowout's like 3 touchdowns. In my mind, a blowout is a 21 or 28 point consistent lead throughout more than 1 quarter. I think Notre Dame will, in my mind, lead Ohio State after the first quarter. They might lead at halftime. I think in the second quarter is when Ohio State pulls away. Daniel Paul, last comment, and then we'll talk about the 3-way race for the Big Ten and the national title. Jim Knowles I criticized in the offseason as basically being Don Brown, but Knowles has made a lot of schematic changes and is not afraid to adjust. Yeah, he mentioned in the preseason, I'm going to be very vulnerable here. I haven't played the game of football. So I'm still learning a lot about the game, of course. But Knowles did mention in the preseason that he was going to really abandon the jack position for all intents and purposes. And I liked that, because now he will have a more traditional, stout Big Ten 4-man front. And listen, I think whether, it's, a 3-3-5 or even, a 4-2-5 with a jack position, against championship caliber teams with physical offenses. The only reason I think TCU's 3-3-5 beat Michigan is Michigan didn't come to play. Michigan was lazy, they were bored, and they underestimated TCU. If they game planned for that game, I think they beat TCU handily. I don't think they blow them out, but I think they beat them handily. Those defenses do not work against, let's say, Todd Monken's Georgia offense or Ohio State's offense, or Michigan's offense if it's operating at peak efficiency. They're too physical for those defenses. Having that traditional 4-man front, which he adapted to, I think is going to help him against a Michigan or against a Notre Dame, against even a Penn State. It's going to help him. I mean, Penn State is more perimeter play. They remind me a lot of Clemson, and I think that's why Penn State could win a national title even with Franklin, is they have the generational quarterback. They have a good staff. And if they get good wide receivers, well, then you're mid-2010s Clemson, where your trench play at O-line is suspect, but everything else is great, and everything else is explosive. But against a Michigan or a Notre Dame or, an offense that is smash mouth, Oregon State for an outside of the Midwest example, and against Georgia and Alabama and those bigger schools, I think that adjustment helps a lot. And we'll just have to wait and see. Okay, moving on. Finally, the three-man race for the Big Ten. We have Michigan, we got Ohio State, and we got Penn State. Everything else, we just got a super chat. That's like rare here. Got to shout out whoever's, did that. Will _8282, thank you very much for the $2. 31-17 Buckeyes is his prediction. I love to hear predictions from people in the comment section or in live chat or in just my community posts. I do think Ohio State wins, at least, for my own selfish reasons, but also just for the fact that I like Ohio State more than Notre Dame. Yeah, I'm the Michigan fan who, just for context here, Notre Dame, from the traditional rivalry standpoint, Notre Dame is probably the traditional rival that I dislike the most, mainly because we don't play them anymore. That is changing with Marcus Freeman being there because I like him. And if they started playing us again, that would probably also change. But for now, that's the case. Thank you so much again for the $2. I'm happy to hear that you like, all the content I produce. Who do you think's the MVP of the game? You can tell me that. The three-man race for the Big Ten. Getting back to, being on topic, of course. Outside of those three, there's no one else. And I think there's a similar theme nationally. I think Michigan and Ohio State right now are the two best teams in college football. Michigan in weeks 1 and 2 looked efficient in every way possible when their starters were in, except for fourth down, and except for the offensive line in week 1, but that's been corrected, at least I think. And the defense every week has looked like one of college football's best defense. I know it's not against good competition, but it's basically every top 10 team's schedule up to this point, outside of Washington, Georgia. Part of me would say Ohio State, but again, I don't know if Indiana's going to go 2-10 or 6-6, so we'll have to wait on that verdict. But that's just an example. Ohio State's defense has looked similar to Michigan's defense. Their offense is peaking right now, and I think they figured out how to hit, how to get in stride against Western Kentucky, who might be the worst defense that they faced, but nonetheless, practice makes perfect. Georgia, I would have power rated ahead of Washington. They have a lot more talent. They can afford major injuries, and they can still be a national title contender. For example, Washington, they lost Cameron Davis, and their run game is just done. They have to go in the Wildcat formation or beat you through the air relentlessly in order to get 4 yards per carry. And their special teams aren't good. But they look more efficient than Georgia. I think those 4 teams that I've mentioned, Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, Washington, I also think there's an argument for any 4 of those teams to be 1, 2, 3, or 4 based off of those performances. I think those are the top 4 teams in college football. And I think that those 4, I think currently, I'm not going to attach myself to this opinion because this would be an overreaction. I think one of those 4 teams wins the national title. I would lean more toward everyone but Georgia. And it's not even because I think Georgia is 4th in that list. I think it's because it's hard to three-peat. That's why. That's honestly the biggest reason. They have the number 1 head coach in football right now. They have the best defensive staff. And from a team talent composite standpoint, they're the most talented out of all those schools. So you know, absolutely. Definitely Marvin Harrison Jr. He's a game changer. Thank you for letting me know you're MVP. I really appreciate it. I think that the Big Ten, I'm glad the Big Ten's adding Washington, Oregon, USC, and UCLA next year. I don't think it will be the same, three ring circus. I only say that because the Big Ten hasn't won a college football playoff semifinal. If you exclude the COVID year, and I'm not going to do that, but outside of Ohio State, the Big Ten's never won a college football playoff semifinal. And Ohio State under Ryan Day hasn't since 2020, which was one of the Big Ten's weakest regular seasons in recent memory. I'm glad that the Big Ten's adding more competition. And I think that between Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, I'd say that Penn State was the most impressive team in week 3. Penn State's the most impressive team relative to preseason expectations. I would say the most impressive team overall has to go to Ohio State or Michigan. Ohio State and Michigan defensively have constantly looked better than Penn State in my mind. I know that Penn State's gotten more turnovers. I think they've gotten more sacks too. But I really like what Ohio State and Michigan are doing. And they're not quite as aggressive as Penn State's defense, so they're not going to rack up those same statistics. That also means they're not going to be burned as much when they face tougher competition. So there's, trade-offs for everything. And I think Michigan and Ohio State have the better and far more efficient offenses than Penn State does, even though Drew Aller has impressed me. I'd power rate Michigan 1, Ohio State 2, though I think there is an argument for Ohio State to be 1, a strong argument. There's even an argument for Penn State to be 1, but I think it's much weaker. But those by far are the top 3 teams. Penn State, for example, is much closer to Ohio State or Michigan than they are to the 4th best team in the conference, who honestly right now is, I would say, Wisconsin, because I'm high on Luke Fickell still, but it's more likely than not, from an on-the-field and winning standpoint, it's Iowa, and they're far ahead of Iowa. So it's a 3-man race for the Big Ten once again, and nationally, who knows at this point, but I think it's Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, Washington. I think Texas and Florida State, I actually choose Florida State to have a better chance at winning it all than Texas. I don't. Alabama just looked so bad. LSU right now looks like, honestly, a much better team than Alabama. And Florida State, I think, has a better... This is so shocking to say because I know Texas has more talent. I think Florida State, with their returning production and the veterans present, have a better chance of winning it all. That might be an insane take, but there's an intuitive sense I get. Even though I think Texas can win it all, and I even said that in the preseason. They have the talent, the quarterback, the skill positions, and the trench play to do it all. We got another super chat. SFS Inverted. I'm an OSU fan, and I haven't been this nervous about a game since last year's Georgia game. If we lose, we will never hear the end of it. Yeah, you'd have to beat Penn State to, get some noise cancellation, and you'd have to beat Michigan to shut everyone up if you lost this game. And I said to some friends who said that Notre Dame is more to lose, my argument was, come on, Marcus Freeman's in year 2. Marcus Freeman could afford to lose this game like 49-10. And, given how good I think Ohio State is, he could get blown out, and Notre Dame could still find a way to go 10-2 or 11-1 or 9-3 and win their bowl game, and his season's an improvement, and he's on the right track. Ohio State practically has to go 11-1 in the regular season at minimum in order for, a Chernobyl-level meltdown to not occur. If they go 10-2, likely losing to Michigan and either Penn State or Notre Dame, or maybe Wisconsin, because that's a letdown spot, and I still think they're good, that would not be ideal. It'd be anything but optimal. And of course, really 12-0 is what you want. You want to beat everyone. You to a certain degree, you need to beat Michigan. I think the true definition of need, of course, for Ryan Day to keep his job is beating Michigan next year in Columbus, which I think is likely, given that it's on the road. It would take a lot for me to pick Michigan to go on the road and win in Columbus. They'd have to have the far superior team and at least a somewhat superior team on paper. Maryland is in the argument for fourth. Music for me 007. The problem, and thank you SFS Inverted for the $5. I really appreciate it. Your guys' support is never expected. It's just very much appreciated. Maryland starts off so slow. They're a total second half team, which is great. But Ohio State gets them at home, and if Ohio State gets up early, like 28 or 21 to nothing, I think that's basically game with their defense. So maybe I'm wrong. Of course, given this year, there's a good chance that I'm wrong. But with Maryland, I need to see how they play against Michigan State first. I mean, there's a legitimate chance Michigan State wins that game. Maryland was down to Charlotte, they were down to Virginia, and they weren't world beaters against Towson. So I'm very curious to see what Maryland and Rutgers do. Rutgers right now is good trench play, and they have a great running back room. I think with Michigan State searching for a head coach and all, there's a very good chance that, I don't know, that, Rutgers and Maryland can go bowling in the same season. There's a very good chance of that happening, in my mind. Basically all the talking points I wanted to go over today, I've done. I'd say, tell me your thoughts about my top four teams: Michigan 1, Ohio State 2, Washington 3, Georgia 4. And just, tell me anything that you have on your mind. And I'm going to stay on for a few minutes, and then we'll end the show. Darren talks ball. Outside of JJ's awful interceptions, Michigan actually played insanely well this past week. First team defense has only given up 6 points all season thus far, and 3 of them were off of a turnover. Yes, Michigan has legit defense. Their O-line and run game looked good. It did. The problem with Michigan against Bowling Green wasn't they couldn't run. They didn't run the football enough. For whatever reason, Sharon Moore tried to pass the ball a ton, which I don't know why he did that. I think that's something Harbaugh wants to do, but then he called bad plays and only wanted to go vertical and deep. And that's not Michigan's offense. You only have one player who's truly a vertical threat against most defenses that matter. That's Roman Wilson. Cornelius Johnson's a possession guy, and he's a good route runner. But, the reason he got open against Ohio State was missed assignments and no safety help. He's not a guy who can, beat you in double coverage or who's this constant vertical threat. He's a great player. Roman Wilson, though, actually has that kind of elite potential, I think. But Michigan has played, people have, bashed on me, and I'm saying, looking at these games, Michigan's playing really well. The O-line was initially a problem. It looks much better now. McCarthy, I think that's closer to a fluke than not, but I'm not going to attach myself to that because Rutgers has a defense. They have 20 pass deflections, a few interceptions. They're very solid on defense. We'll see what McCarthy does in that game. I imagine Michigan will want to pass the ball more. Someone else, Notre Dame has way more to lose. This is Matthew, because Ohio State has a much better strength of schedule, in his opinion. Ohio State does have a better strength of schedule, but that's just from a perspective of reaching the playoffs. Notre Dame, if they don't reach the playoffs, but they reach a New Year's Six Bowl or they win a New Year's Six Bowl, their season is far from a failure. Very far from a failure. We'll come back to your comment rather shortly, but I want to thank Will again for the $5. I think Michigan versus Maryland is a massive trap game. Let me tell you, Michigan's a much better team, but Uncle Lou, who is, by the way, I think he's very sharp. Let's just put it that way. Very sharp, Uncle Lou is. He likes to irritate fan bases, but he's smart. He knows football. He watches as many games as possible. He picked Michigan to lose to Maryland, but beat everyone else. I had no qualms about that pick. None. Look at Illinois last year. Michigan nearly lost to an 8-5 Illinois team. At home. which, oh my gosh, my heart was racing during that game. It was horrible. I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be surprised, but it wouldn't be like world-ending. How did this happen if Michigan lost to Maryland? It's a sandwich game. It is a sandwich trap game, full pound burger type sandwich game. That's a very tough spot for Michigan. If Maryland is good, if Maryland is just mediocre, or they've regressed from last year, that could just be another blowout that Michigan puts in their cap. But thank you, Will, so much for the donations and for commenting. I really appreciate it. Music for me, 007. It would be wild if Rutgers could actually stuff the run against Michigan. You would find it if JJ can win you the game. I think he probably would. Good test, though. Oh, I agree. I'm now confident when I see a 3rd and long, I think to myself, we got this. That's what I think to myself when I see a 3rd and long now as a Michigan fan. We don't have, the passing game that Ohio State or Washington do when they operate at peak efficiency. But my goodness, we might have I think we definitely have a top 25 passing game. We'll have to see about that as the season goes along, but that's a massive improvement compared to where we were in 2021 and 2022. We actually can have a versatile offense that can attack different defenses, and we can drive people nuts. We can do to everyone, like last year, for example, even against Ohio State, when we were able to run eventually and pass against them, even that had inconsistencies. McCarthy only completed half of his pass attempts, and we could only run in the second half. Now I think we can do that to many teams on a consistent basis. So I agree with you. Rutgers, their defense is good. I think, though, that against mobile quarterbacks, there will be some issues for them in the run game. I think their strength is at linebacker and secondary, but I could be wrong. I watched their Virginia Tech game, and Virginia Tech was able to run their quarterback a few times. But really, Rutgers' defense is really stout. And Wimsatt's been very efficient, especially in the run, and his passing's improved a little as well. So I think it will be a good test for Michigan. Rutgers, I don't think they are top 25. Maybe they have a smidgen of top 25 potential. I do think they're a bowl caliber team, though. I think they're going 6-6 with Michigan State looking down and them hosting the Spartans. And they're a physical team. I think they'll win a game that they shouldn't win, whether that's against a Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, or whether that's just against, a lower level team that's still expected to beat them. Okay. Lots of people see the final score and think, oh, Michigan only won 35-7 when the game was over halfway through the second quarter. Yeah, Michigan right now has no interest in running up the score. Now, the reason that worries me is because if Michigan plays bored and all of a sudden Rutgers is much better than we expect, or, JJ throws 2 picks against Nebraska's, defense, which is just fast and physical, or they, do it against Minnesota, that could cause some problems. Playing bored is okay, but boredom can very easily switch to laziness. And you don't want that if you're Michigan. I think that'll change with Harbaugh. I think that Michigan will score more points. They won't be as disinterested with him back. I think Blake Corum even alluded to that. But that's just my opinion. Laith Musa, I was in class with this guy in high school. Funny, cool, intelligent. Good to see you here. I haven't seen you in the comment sections recently, but that's honestly because I've been producing so much content that I can't, I was going to say travel, but that's the totally wrong word. I can't sort through the comments as easily as I used to be able to. But it's nice to see you, Laith. Darren talks ball. Sam Webb and Devin Gardner have covered this well. Michigan's run game is such a threat. Teams have to load 8 and even 9 guys to stop it. Exactly. And JJ right now has accuracy, and he can, look, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the nation, or he has the potential to be that. I'm not going to, overreact quite yet. But I think so far through 3 games, he looks better than he did last year. And Challenge Gamer, I'm not going to click on your comment because I, just answered that. But yes, I do think that Michigan will be better with Jim Harbaugh there. Anyone have final thoughts? This was a great stream today. Absolutely elite stream. Oh, here we go. Beetle, look, Rutgers will never beat Michigan ever. Well, now that you say that, watch them beat Michigan by 10 this weekend, like running for 200 yards on 3.5 yards per carry and like having 40 minutes of TOP. In all seriousness, I don't think that'll happen, but never say never. Never say never. I just say that because stuff. Missouri almost beat Georgia last year. South Carolina, no offensive line. South Carolina nearly beat Georgia week 3. Never say never. Lath, thank you, man. He says, love the channel, bro. Keep it up. Oh, I will. I'm producing more content now than I ever have in the history of the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching the video and for tuning into this live stream. This will be a consistent thing of Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern time. A very consistent thing. And who knows? I might do another one, but I'm not going to make any promises. For now, it's going to be Thursdays at 7 p.m. Be consistent. Remember, please remember this. There is a scheduled live stream for my watch party that will be on YouTube starting at 7:20 p.m. Saturday for the Notre Dame Ohio State game, where I will be live reacting to that and commentating on it. Hopefully we can get several thousand people on there consistently. That would be awesome. It'd be a great way to build the community. So if you can, share it around. If you haven't already subscribed to me or like this live stream, please do. But otherwise, just show up, be there if you can. It'll be great. It'll be fun. And I also, again, will be doing this weekly Thursdays at 7 p.m. And yeah, thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it. Go Blue, Challenge Gamer, Hummus Hero, you're welcome. Thank you for the compliment. Dream in Digital, it's nice to see you. Nebraska fan. Go Big Red. And Hummus Hero, go Buckeyes. I'm hoping you guys beat Notre Dame and fulfill my prediction. And Tyler Stossel, thank you for being awesome. Love the content. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being on here. And I will see you shortly.